And already I'm starting to feel the effects of it. So, I mean, you can probably hear in my voice that I'm starting to sound or feel a little bit out of breath, but all I've done is walk from that corner down there to here. So it's not that far, but I'm feeling out of breath already. And I mean, look, I'll give you that I'm not that fit, but I should not be feeling out of breath for simply walking 100 meters down the street. Hey everyone, I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to Latin America Diaries, and welcome back to Bolivia. I flew out very early one morning from Santiago International Airport in Chile to the airport in Santa Cruz de la Sierra in Bolivia. And before we go on, I think it's worth talking a little bit about the slightly strange setup that Bolivia has with its aviation industry. Most people would assume that most flights in Bolivia would come into and out of La Paz, which is the largest city in the country. It's the world's highest capital city, sitting at about 3,600 meters above sea level. And the airport that serves La Paz, El Alto International Airport, is even higher. It's located on the plateau above the city in El Alto, another suburb of the city, at around 4,000 meters above sea level, making it one of the highest international airports in the world. Planes need more runway to take off, and there are strict limits on weight. In practical terms, that means that long-haul flights can't depart from La Paz with full fuel tanks. They'd simply be too heavy to get off the ground. Because of that, most international flights operate through Santa Cruz de la Sierra, which is another big city in Bolivia. It sits much lower, on the edge of the Amazon basin. It's flatter, warmer, and far more suitable for long-distance aviation. A common setup is for international flights to land in La Paz with their fuel tanks almost empty at the end of a long flight. Pick up passengers, continue onwards to Santa Cruz de la Sierra, pick up more passengers, and then refuel for their long journey outbound. And that's exactly what my flight with LATAM Airlines did. We flew from Santiago over some spectacular salt flats towards La Paz, arriving with less fuel than usual. The landing itself felt different, noticeably so. You don't descend nearly as far as you expect. From cruising altitude, there's only a relatively short descent before you're already on approach. As we came in, the plane slowed right down. It almost felt like we were crawling over the city. Below us was the vast, high-altitude plateau of El Alto, dotted with what looked like unfinished brick houses stretching out across the landscape. What makes this airport even more extraordinary is something that you don't see as a passenger. Because aircraft cabins are typically pressurized to the equivalent of about 2,500 meters above sea level, the air outside at El Alto is actually thinner than the air inside the plane during the flight. As a result, pilots sometimes need to use supplemental oxygen during landing to stay fully alert in those conditions. Of course, from inside the cabin as a passenger, everything feels and seems very normal, but behind the scenes, it's actually a very extreme operation in every sense of the word. We landed, refueled, picked up passengers, and then continued onwards towards Santa Cruz de la Sierra, where we landed about an hour later. I made my way to the Adventure 360 hostel, where my shared dorm room turned out to be a giant private room that I had all to myself, and the hostel was full of, shall we say, interesting types of people, just a little bit oddball. Santa Cruz de la Sierra was never really my final destination anyway. It was just a place that I, like many travelers, was passing through on my way to other destinations in Bolivia. I set out and explored the city a little bit because I had one day spare. It reminded me a little bit of the inland cities in Brazil, or maybe some of the flatter cities in Colombia. It's a side of Bolivia that most people don't really think about, and it's an important transport hub. It was pleasant enough, hot and humid, unlike the cooler climes of Chile and Argentina, or the icy landscape that I saw from the plane window at La Paz. I strolled through the central square trying to stave off jet lag, and there were these older gentlemen wandering around proffering cups of local coffee to anyone who felt like it. Yes, please. Then I headed out towards the very chaotic bus station to book my ticket onwards to my next destination. From there, I would be heading back up into the mountains, not quite as high as La Paz initially. The destination was Sucre, which is actually the capital of Bolivia. I took an overnight bus, and unfortunately, I would prefer not to be on buses overnight through winding mountain roads, but most of the long-distance buses in Bolivia seem to operate exclusively overnight, and it's just something that you have to accept as part of traveling in Bolivia. You either accept it or you have to rethink your travel plans entirely. I boarded the bus and headed towards Sucre, which, as I mentioned, is the official capital of Bolivia. Now, I know what you're thinking. Tim, earlier you said that La Paz is the capital. Well, they both kind of are. It's a bit of one of those situations, a bit like Canberra and Sydney in Australia, or Islamabad and Karachi in Pakistan, or Brasilia and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, where the largest city is not necessarily the capital. Sucre sits at about 2,700 meters above sea level, and it's where Bolivia declared independence from the Spanish Empire. So therefore it's the capital. So how can La Paz also be the capital? This is what makes it a little bit more complicated than the situation with Canberra and Sydney or Islamabad and Karachi, because in Bolivia, the fact that independence was declared in Sucre means that this is the constitutional capital. It is officially the capital of Bolivia. However, the government doesn't meet in Sucre. The government meets in La Paz. So La Paz is known as the administrative capital because that's where all the big decisions are made. But in the constitution, Sucre is officially listed as the capital. It's a little bit like if Australia decided that Canberra would continue to be the capital, but let's just cut the crap and allow politicians to meet and make the decisions in Sydney rather than flying down to Canberra every Monday morning. It's a slightly confusing setup, but that's Bolivia. If you like random facts like this, then please consider giving this video a like, subscribing to my channel, and sharing my content across social media. And if you really like what you're seeing, please tell your family and friends about it. That kind of word of mouth recommendation, it really helps my channel grow. Once I arrived in Sucre very early that morning, I checked into the Colors House hostel, which was in this grand old colonial mansion, and headed straight out to explore the town. And very quickly you get to see why Sucre is listed as the official constitutional capital of Bolivia. It's a genuinely historic place, one of those cities where it feels like the Bolivian spirit is not just present, but actively living in the streets. It has this Spanish colonial character, but it's softened by its setting in the hills. It's not as chaotic or extreme as La Paz, and it doesn't sprawl in the same way. In a strange way, it actually makes sense as a capital, at least emotionally, if not politically. I spent the afternoon wandering through the streets, taking in the old whitewashed buildings and climbing up to viewpoints over the city. Then in the evening, I went out to try one of Bolivia's more well-known national dishes. And the phrase well-known is relative here, because Bolivian food isn't exactly globally famous. Okay, so I am here in a food court, in a supermarket actually. It's a food court and a supermarket in Sucre in Bolivia. And I am about to taste Bolivia's national dish, which is cazuela de maní, which is peanut soup. And I don't know, it's different to what I was expecting. It looks different to what I was expecting. It's a lot yellower than I thought it was going to be. And I can see what appears to be chicken in there as well. So this could be interesting. Here goes. Oh. Interesting. It's not super peanutty. Like it's almost as if they use the peanuts as like flavoring for the soup. But that's not the main point of it. Like I can taste, it's almost a bit potato-y or something like that, like potato and leek soup. I'm gonna taste a bit more before I look at that. Like there's a lot more to it than just peanuts. Definitely potato-y. I quite like that actually. Thank you, Bolivia. Tick. The next morning I woke up and I had a work meeting, which I took from the balcony of the hostel. Sitting there connected to Pakistan and Spain and other parts of the world while I was looking over the colonial grandeur of Bolivia's spiritual and historic and constitutional capital, it was a kind of weird juxtaposition. And then I was done with that, and it was time to head out into the city to continue exploring. At one point, I accidentally walked straight into a street rally. It seemed to be connected to Bolivian independence, although I'll be honest, I didn't fully catch every detail of what was being said. Later, I visited the National Museum, specifically the section known as Freedom House, Casa de la Libertad. That's where I learned more about Bolivia's struggle for independence from the Spanish Empire. One of the central figures in that story is Simón Bolívar. You might remember him from history class, or you might remember him from one of my earlier episodes in Colombia. He was born in Venezuela, and he played a major role in independence movements across much of South America. In fact, Bolivia itself is named after him. Interestingly and somewhat sadly though, Bolívar never really saw the full end of that story unfold in Bolivia. He passed away in what is now Colombia, but his influence is deeply embedded across the region. From there, I headed to the Palacio de Gobierno, the historic government building in Sucre. You can climb up to the rooftop for a small fee, and it's absolutely worth it. From up there, you get sweeping views over this compact, beautiful Andean city. It was also in Sucre that afternoon that I celebrated the Bolivian edition of my 40th birthday. I had a torta de hojas, a cake of leaves. It's not unique to Bolivia, but it's a cake that I had been told that this particular cafe does very well. Layers of pastry fused together with dulce de leche. I really loved Sucre. It had this really gorgeous blend of sort of Andean but also Mediterranean atmosphere. Soft light, white buildings, warm tones. The climate is mild, the air is crisp, but the sun's dry and warm. It's just beautiful. And having already been to parts of Bolivia, the Uyuni salt flat with Amit a month earlier, and then later traveling to other parts of Bolivia, Sucre still stood out. It's one of those places that quietly makes sense as a capital, even if the population weight sits elsewhere in La Paz. The next morning from the Sucre bus station, I jumped in a bus and headed towards one of the highest points on my journey in the small town of Potosi. This is one of the few bus routes in Bolivia that is offered as a day service. Potosi sits at around 4,000 meters above sea level, so very similar in altitude to La Paz's airport. As we climbed higher, I started to feel the altitude again. It hit that familiar point where everything feels slightly slower and slightly heavier. The last time that I had felt that, I was in Uyuni with Amit, and Potosi brought it all back. We're going to talk a bit about altitude because 3,000 meters is the altitude at which you start to feel the symptoms of altitude, sickness. Not really altitude sickness, more just like the effects of the lack of oxygen. However, here today, I have actually gone from 2,000 meters up to 4,000 in 4 hours, which is a pretty quick jump up above the threshold. And already I'm starting to feel the effects of it. So, you can probably hear in my voice that I'm starting to feel a little bit out of breath. But all I've done is walk from that corner down there to here. So it's not that far, but I'm feeling out of breath already. And look, I'll give you that I'm not that fit, but I should not be feeling out of breath for simply walking 100 meters down the street. This is what it's like. In Potosi, I stayed at the bizarrely cavernous Hostel Casablanca, where I was originally put into a dormitory room with another traveler whose shoes reeked so badly that you could even taste it on your tongue. So I mentioned that to the guys at reception, and they were nice enough to put me into a private room. Score. Now, Potosi is historically one of the most significant cities in South America. The reason for that is the mountain that rises behind it, Cerro Rico, or Rich Hill. From the 16th century onwards, this mountain was believed to contain some of the richest silver deposits in the world. So much silver, in fact, that it helped fund much of the Spanish Empire during its colonial expansion. At its peak, Potosi wasn't just important, it was actually one of the wealthiest cities on earth. There's even a famous Spanish phrase, vale un Potosi, meaning something is incredibly valuable. Literally, it's worth a Potosi. But that wealth came at a heavy human cost. Cerro Rico was extensively mined during colonial times, often under brutal conditions, especially through forced indigenous labor systems. Over time, the mountain was gradually hollowed out, and today it still has active mining, but nothing close to the scale or wealth of its past. The town is another beautiful example of Andean colonial architecture. Walking through it, you can feel that contrast between grandeur and decline. It's still an important city, but it's very clearly a shadow of what it once was, when silver was flowing out of the hills in vast quantities. It also felt different from Sucre, where Sucre felt refined and elegant. Potosi felt raw and exposed to the elements and rough around the edges, more working class, more rugged. It's almost like an unfiltered version of Bolivia, and at a higher altitude it was colder as well. One of the highlights was visiting the national mint of Bolivia, the Casa Nacional de la Moneda. This is the historic mint where, during colonial times, silver was extracted from Cerro Rico and turned into coins that circulated across the Spanish Empire. Walking through it is fascinating. You see the machinery, the old minting processes, and the way raw silver was transformed into currency. It gives you a very tangible sense of how global power and local extraction were physically connected in this one place. It's compulsory to walk through the museum as part of a guided tour, and one of the ladies in our group said that she started feeling extremely unwell because of the effects of altitude, and she actually collapsed in the hallway just around the corner from where we were standing. The museum got its medics straight away and made sure that she was okay, but it's just a reminder that in a place like this, the altitude and the environment is no joke. The good news is that everywhere that you go in Bolivia, airports, museums, cafes, hotels, everywhere that you go has a first aid kit with emergency oxygen supply, just in case someone needs it. That evening, I checked out of the hostel, where I luckily had a late checkout, and made my way over to the Potosi bus station, where I boarded my second overnight bus journey in Bolivia. This time I was heading to La Paz, and if you want to see more of that, make sure that you tune in again next time, because that's where we pick up next week in Latin America Diaries. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you then.